The year is 1941. While America is fiercely debating its role in a world tearing itself apart, the Republic of China is on its knees. For 4 brutal years, it's been locked in the death struggle against the invading forces of Imperial Japan. Chinese cities are being bombed into rubble with a horrifying regularity. And the world, for the most part, just looks away. China's Air Force is practically gone, its pilots and planes totally outmatched by the Japanese. In total desperation, China turned to one man, a leathery, hard-bitten American outcast named Claire Lee Chennault. Chennault was a brilliant visionary who nobody listened to. A career officer in the U.S. Army Air Corps, he was stubborn, argumentative, and constantly clashed with his superiors. While the top brass was obsessed with the theory that high-altitude bombers were invincible, Chennault, a fighter pilot to his core, furiously disagreed. He insisted that a well-led group of fighters using the right tactics could shred any bomber formation to pieces. His ideas weren't just dismissed, they were seen as heresy. Partially deaf and completely fed up, he was pushed into retirement in 1937. But Chennault's radical theories found a very eager audience in China. He was hired as an advisor and saw firsthand just how devastating the Japanese war machine was, but he also saw its weaknesses. And in that desperation, he came up with a plan so audacious, so legally questionable, it would require the secret approval of the President of the United States. But there was another layer to this mission, one almost never spoken aloud at the time. The United States wasn't helping China out of pure altruism. Washington was increasingly alarmed by Japan's rapid expansion across Asia. If China collapsed, Japan would gain access to enormous resources and a direct path toward the Philippines, an American territory. That would shatter the balance of power in the Pacific. Supporting China became a way for the U.S. to contain Japan without entering a formal war, to keep the front thousands of miles away from American soil, and to strengthen ties with Britain, which was desperately trying to hold Burma. In other words, the creation of a secret American air unit in China wasn't just an act of bravery. It was a quiet piece of U.S. grand strategy, a covert attempt to hold back an empire long before the first American soldier fired a shot. Chennault knew China couldn't win with what it had. He needed American planes and, more importantly, American pilots. With some help from Chinese diplomats, he pleaded his case in Washington. In an act that sidestepped America's own neutrality acts, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed a secret, unpublished executive order greenlighting the mission. Suddenly, recruiters started quietly showing up at U.S. military air bases. They were looking for the best, most adventurous, and maybe the most reckless pilots they could find. The pitch they offered was almost unbelievable. Resign your commission. Travel to Asia under a fake identity. A teacher, an artist, anything but a pilot. Become a paid mercenary. The contracts were explicit. The men were officially civilian employees of the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company, a front for the Chinese government. And the pay? It was incredible. Up to $750 a month for a squadron commander, plus a battlefield commission and a cash bonus of $500 for every confirmed enemy plane they shot down. For some, it was about the money. For others, the adventure. But for many, it was a chance to fight the Japanese before their own country was willing to join the fight. This was the first American Volunteer Group, or AVG.
They were given roughly 100 Curtiss P-40B Warhawks. Now, the P-40 was not the best fighter in the sky. It was heavy, and it couldn't climb as fast or turn as tight as the legendary Japanese A6M-0. But Chennault saw its hidden strengths. The P-40 was built like a tank, it was heavily armed, and it could dive like a rock. The P-40 itself was a paradox. On paper, it was outclassed by its Japanese opponents, slower, heavier, and unable to match the Zero's legendary turning ability, But what it lacked in elegance, it made up for in brute strength. Its Allison V1710 engine gave it exceptional dive speed, letting AVG pilots strike from above like a sledgehammer. Its rugged frame could absorb punishment that would rip lighter fighters apart. And with 6.50 caliber machine guns in the wings, it hit like a flying brick of firepower. The P-40 wasn't built for graceful dogfights. It was built for Chennault's style of combat. Hit hard, dive away, live to fight again. In the hands of ordinary pilots, it was just a mediocre warplane. In the hands of the Flying Tigers, it became one of the deadliest interceptors of the early Pacific War.
Chennault took his group of triple volunteers, men who had volunteered for the U.S. military, then for this secret mission, and finally for the brutal combat ahead, and retrained them from scratch. He threw the old rule book out. He told them to forget everything they knew about honorable one-on-one dogfights. His new doctrine was built on his years of watching Japanese pilots in action. The first duty of a fighter pilot, he'd tell them, is to get in position to shoot down the enemy. The second duty is to get out of there and live to fight another day. To rob the Japanese of their key advantage, surprise, Chennault set up a huge early warning network of Chinese spotters with radios, who would report incoming raids long before they hit their targets. Then came the icon. Looking for a way to intimidate the enemy, the pilots saw a magazine photo of British RAF P-40s in North Africa painted with a shark's mouth. They adopted it, and an aviation legend was born.
December 20th, 1941. Just 13 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, 10 unescorted Japanese bombers droned towards the city of Kunming, China. They're expecting another easy raid on a defenseless city. What they got instead was a swarm of shark-mouthed P-40s diving out of the sun. The AVG pilots tore into the formation. The stunned Japanese crews dropped their bombs far from the city and tried to run. It was no use. 3 bombers were shot down instantly, and a 4th was so badly damaged it crashed on its way home. After that first rout, the Japanese largely avoided daylight raids on Kunming as long as the AVG was there to defend it. The news of this stunning victory was a massive morale boost for the Allies, coming during the darkest days of the Pacific War. The name the American press gave them, the Flying Tigers, stuck.
And that was just the beginning. The Tigers were thrown into the desperate defense of Rangoon, Burma, fighting alongside the British RAF to protect the critical Burma Road, China's last supply lifeline. They were always outnumbered, sometimes facing Japanese forces 20 times their size. Flying in grueling conditions, with constant shortages of parts and fuel, they inflicted staggering losses on the enemy. By late January 1942, the AVG had shot down 73 Japanese planes, losing only 5 of their own in combat. Not everything within the AVG was smooth sailing. Chennault's leadership, while brilliant, was not universally loved. Some pilots bristled at his strict methods and unconventional tactics, questioning whether the man they followed to the skies was as infallible as the legends suggested. Discipline was another challenge. These were men used to the autonomy of military service, suddenly thrown into a foreign land with high stakes and even higher pay. And when the AVG was disbanded in July 1942, disputes over contracts, bonuses, and battlefield credits flared up. Some pilots felt the system had betrayed them. Others simply wanted to walk away with the pride and pay they had earned. These tensions didn't diminish their heroism. They humanized it, showing that even legends are made of flawed, very real men.
But their most decisive moment came in May 1942 at the Salween River Gorge. A massive Japanese army had pushed through Burma and was about to cross the river, opening a direct path into the heart of China. The retreating Chinese army blew the main bridge, trapping the Japanese on the other side.
As Chennault himself wrote, there were no obstacles between the Japanese and Kunming, but a broken bridge and the AVG. For 4 straight days, the handful of Flying Tiger pilots flew relentless bombing and strafing missions into the mile-deep gorge. Now equipped with newer P-40E models that could carry bombs, they hammered the trapped Japanese columns. Squadron leader Tex Hill, one of Chennault's top aces, led the attack, with pilots calling the scene a turkey shoot. They single-handedly stopped the advance of an entire Japanese army, saving China from being knocked out of the war. It remains one of the most decisive uses of tactical air power in history.
The story of the Flying Tigers is filled with hundreds of individual acts of heroism, from pilots like Tex Hill and Charles Bond to the ground crews who kept those planes flying with pure grit. These are the kinds of stories that often get lost to history. If you want to hear more about the forgotten stories and machines of the 20th and 21st century, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next video.
Of course, a secret like this couldn't last forever. On July 4, 1942, with the United States now fully in the war, the American Volunteer Group was officially disbanded. It was absorbed into the U.S. Army Air Forces, becoming the core of the new 23rd Fighter Group, and they simply went home. But their legacy was already written in the skies over Asia. In just over 6 months of combat, the AVG was officially credited with destroying 296 enemy aircraft. This incredible achievement came at the cost of only 14 of their own pilots lost in combat. It remains one of the most impressive killed-to-loss ratios in the history of air warfare. They were a secret squadron of volunteers, a band of brothers in obsolete planes, led by a man the military had thrown away.